with my This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. For months, a great debate has raged in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, particularly north of town on the I-77 corridor. Wait, let me allow a guest voice to explain it.
Charlotte is one of the fastest growing regions of the country, with a population that has more than doubled in the past 25 years. There are more cars than ever, making I-77 one of the most congested roadways in North Carolina. To resolve this situation, commuters who travel the corridor between uptown Charlotte and the Lake Norman area will soon have the option of a faster and more reliable way to get to and from places like work, appointments, shopping, or the airport. That option will be the new I-77 express lanes that will offer drivers the choice of faster travel on a series of congestion-free express toll lanes that are being built adjacent to the existing I-77 general-purpose lanes.
That's audio from a promotional video found on the I-77 Mobility Partners website promoting the benefits of the subject of this months-long great debate, toll lanes. The video paints a picture of a happier time ahead, but in the here and now, there are a lot of angry people very much opposed to this project. Proponents say this is a cost-effective way to ensure better traffic flow.
The new I-77 express lanes will add capacity to the corridor without affecting the current general-purpose lanes. At completion, there will be the same number of toll-free general-purpose lanes as there are now.
That's also an argument against these lanes, but it's just one of the arguments, and despite being told nothing can be done, despite a setback in court, opponents are still working to stop this project, on which work has already begun. We've done several Charlotte Talks programs on this topic, but today we hear from the opposition to the project. Kurt Nass is founder of Widen I-77, a citizen movement opposing the plan and one of its most vocal and learned opponents. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. State Representative Charles Jeter, a Republican from Huntersville, was supposed to be with us this morning. He has shifted his support to the opposition on this project, but he had a work-related matter come up at the last minute, so we are happy to welcome Mecklenburg County Commissioner Jim Puckett to this conversation from District 1. He, too, is opposed to the project. Welcome back.
Mike, it's always a pleasure to be here.
And because this is a topic with many players, complexities, and moving parts, we have WFAE News reporters David Borax and Tom Bullock with us. David has been covering this issue since it was first floated in 2010. Tom Bullock was at a meeting of the Charlotte City Council on Monday night in which they decided to throw the city's support to the toll lanes. Thank you all for being here.
Good morning, Mike. It's Mike.
Good morning. David, you've been covering this for years, first from your online community news network that included DavidsonNews.net and CorneliusNews.net, and now for WFAE. The need to widen I-77 has been a known problem for years. How did we end up with the suggestion of toll lanes?
Well, Mike, they've been trying to figure out how to widen this road for quite some time. The last major widening was in the mid-2000s, around 2005, when the area up to Huntersville was widened, and that solved problems there, but it didn't address the problem at that time and a problem that has grown since then, which is from Huntersville up to Mooresville. So they've looked at a variety of things. One of the first stories I wrote about I-77 widening in 2008 was an environmental study they were getting ready to do on widening the causeways across Lake Norman in Cornelius and Davidson. And the price tag on that project was something like $525 million, if you guys remember that. There was not money at that time to do that project, and as they looked at this whole corridor, they realized that it was going to be an incredibly expensive project that there wasn't money in the DOT budget to do. We are driving less. We drive more fuel-efficient cars. Most of the money for roads comes from the gasoline tax. So in 2009, 2010, they did a study called the Fast Lane Study to look at the option of adding what they called at that time hot lanes, high occupancy toll lanes. And in 2010, they brought that forward to regional transportation planners, and it began to work its way through this system of approvals.
And as I understand it, it got the approval of a lot of business people in that area. It got approval of politicians in that area. When and why did opposition begin to emerge?
Well, at the beginning of this, we were told in the Lake Norman area that there was no money and there was no other option and that this was the best way to do it. But as people began to look into this project, they began to have some questions about it. They studied what was going on in other areas and how toll lane projects have worked there. I think it was in about 2011 or 2012 that Kurt began looking more closely at this whole thing. This is before a contract was signed, and questions began to be raised. Now, up until that time and beyond that, the business community continued to support it. The major opposition has really built in the last 18 months, I would say.
When did you start this group, Widen I-77, Kurt Nass, and why?
Yeah, I started it in actually fall of 2012. When after talking to my local elected officials, I was getting nowhere, and I kind of threw up my hands, and I wrote an open letter in one of the local weeklies up there. And I said, does anybody else feel the same way about this project? And I put my personal email address on there, and I got 40 responses. And I responded to each one. Some of them were a bit nuttier than others maybe, but the ones that were more reasoned, I said, would you be interested in forming an organization to look at this and to educate the public on this? And we held our first public meeting in January of 2013.
What was it about that initial exposure to these toll lanes that bothered you the most?
Well, there's a divergence between what's in the public interest and what is in the private interest. The public wants free-flowing traffic and no tolls, and the private company wants lots of congestion so they could charge high tolls. So you have this fundamental incompatibility with what is in the public interest, and so what you see then is that the private company has every incentive to keep congestion increasing for the next 50 years. This is a 50-year contract, and basically profit off of public misery.
And if I jump in,
Sure.
that is the problem. When you ask where did it kind of flip because people voted for this, when they were presented with the notion of managed lanes and told that was the only option we had, managed lanes work to relieve congestion. It's a congestion relief. It can be any number of things, HOV lanes, reverse lanes so that they all go one way in the morning and another way in the evening, whatever. When this changed to a P3, a private partnership,
Public-private partnership.
Thank you. It became driven for profit. So suddenly the idea of managing the congestion went away.
So let's be clear. Are most of the people who are opposed to this project not opposed to the idea of toll lanes? They're simply opposed to this agreement because it brings in a for-profit organization whose interest it is to keep congestion on the non-toll lanes high.
Yeah, and the answer to that would be no, because I-77 was built in the 1970s.
Right.
There's not been any north-south capacity put in through the Lake Norman region, basically in 40 years. And where you've seen all across the country where toll lanes have been used, they've been used as a last resort. The road has been widened, and it can't be widened anymore. And now we say, okay, people want to pay to use that additional capacity, they will. Here, we're giving all of their existing public right-of-way, the remaining public right-of-way, to a private company or to a tolling company and say, no, our first resort is going to be toll lanes. And we say, wait a minute, let's use the taxes that we've been paying for the last 40 years to improve our infrastructure first, and then maybe at some point in the future add toll lanes.
It is pretty... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and just some facts, which are always an interesting thing to throw into the debate. When you look at, for example, 77, the only time it's widened was widened within the city limits of Charlotte.
Yeah.
485 was widened. 74 has been widened. I-85 has been widened. In their little jingle-backed promotion for this, they talk about that the population in Charlotte has doubled. In the area that we're talking about, the population has grown 533% in the same time, and no widening.
Explain it to me. And I wish that Charles Jeter, Representative Jeter, were here because he changed his mind. He's now in the opposition camp. But he's also in the legislature. Explain to me why that is, why a thoroughfare that runs through one of the most highly populated areas in the state is the one that they haven't widened.
This is the most interesting part of this to me. Is the previous, and I'm not going to throw politics in it, but I'm going to throw politics in it. Under the former regime, if you will, when the Democrats ran the state.
Which regime are we talking
about? That would be the Democratic-controlled
legislature and governor's mansion.
And governor's mansion.
Okay.
And I will go ahead and say right now it doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot better under the Republicans. So let's just be honest. But under the former structure, highway dollars were doled out equitably. And equitably meant that if you got $1 in Charlotte, you need to spend $1 in the eastern part of the state. It wasn't based on need. It wasn't based on road miles traveled, et cetera. So that's why you go to Raleigh and you see tons of asphalt headed east out of Raleigh. You don't see it here in Charlotte. The Republicans came in and said, let's change that. Let's actually do a formula, and we'll spend the money on roads based on some more logical formula. What's interesting about this is the last project that was funded under the old process. And so why the governor does not want to say this is the prime example of why we should have changed this, we don't quite know.
But in the interest of fairness, I want to bring up just a little bit of the other side, just because they're obviously not sitting here at the table. This plan was originally proposed, the contract was put out to bid basically during the Great Recession, when the state was not certain on exactly how much money it would have.
The contract was put out to bid in 2013.
But the scope was developed.
Yeah.
The scope was developed. Around
that's a fair
2008,
right.
2009.
Yeah, I mean, and that's when it came out. Cintra, though, the company that is actually doing the building, I-77 Mobility Partners, is a subdivision of Cintra. They were the only bidders. So there were a lot of questions, too, about how this contract, how generous this contract would be to the sole bidder for a project that was, by everyone's estimation, in dire need of completion as quickly as possible.
And Tom, there were 4 bidders initially and 3 dropped out.
Exactly.
So there were others looking at this, and for reasons that we don't really know, they decided it wasn't worth bidding on.
And this is also a good test, and I think this gets back to Jim's point when it comes to the Republican side of this. This new formula, this STI as they like to call it, is set up to try to take the politics out and to focus on congestion. But this is also a test case for something that has not been done anywhere else in North Carolina yet. It is the first of these public-private partnerships, these P3s, that will be built in the state.
But it's not the first in the country.
It is not by any means the first in the country.
Surely there are other models that you can look at to say this works or it doesn't work.
And that's our biggest concern is when you look at those models, you find that they fail. This is kind of the government Ponzi scheme that's out there. These folks open this up. They get the money to manage it for about 15 years. About the time the debt payments start to come, they bail. So there are plenty of those out there. But the other problem with this one is, even forget the idea of whether you like tolls or you don't like tolls. You like P3s, you don't like P3s. The geography of this particular area, because there is a lake, because there is the causeway that we can't widen, the geography just makes this design the most deplorable place to do this of anywhere in the nation. If this were I-85, you might have a different debate.
Why can't you widen the causeway?
Because, as we heard earlier, it costs $500 million just to do the causeway. Well, that is the most ludicrous part of this, is we're giving away the only right-of-way we own, so that when the day comes and you have to widen it, the state is going to have to pay huge penalties.
And before we started this conversation, you said something that I think maybe people who don't live in that area don't really understand, and that is that stretch of I-77 is not just an interstate highway. It is your local access road to get from one point to another.
Only north-south road through that area other than 2-lane country roads. This is it. If you are in Huntersville and you need to go to Cornelius or you need to go to Davidson, literally the only way you can do it in any type of a timely basis is I-77.
We only have 30 seconds. Why can't we widen the 2-lane country roads? They do in South Carolina.
Well,
Main streets of our towns. Yeah. I mean, it goes right through downtown Davidson. You can't put any lanes in there. You can't go through downtown Huntersville. It's
and not. US 21 is under Lake Norman.
Right. You would have to take out either Huntersville Presbyterian Church or the downtown shops.
We'll come back and talk a lot about this and hear from citizens and more as we go through the hour talking about the opposition to the I-77 toll lanes. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Charlotte Ballet's Innovative Works, a dance performance with new contemporary ballets, plus a reception with the artists after the show. January 29th through February 20th at the Center for Dance, Uptown. Tickets at charlotteballet.org. Well, music in very different styles tomorrow on this program. The music of video games being celebrated at the North American Conference on Video Game Music, which happens to be spending time this year in Davidson at Davidson College. And we hear music from UNC's Clef Hangers. to celebrate the resurgence of a cappella music. They're among the best a cappella performers in the state. That's tomorrow at 9. Coming up on January 25th, Charlotte Talks and NPR working together, exploring what voters across the country think about the 2016 election. And as part of that, we're going to host a voter roundtable. We want you to be part of it if you're interested in participating. Email us at charlottetalks@wfae.org. Tell us a bit about yourself, and who knows, you may be with us on the radio.
On the next Diane Rehm Show, the second biggest producer of coal in the U.S. just filed for bankruptcy. It's just the latest sign of a declining industry facing plummeting energy prices and new environmental regulations. The future of America's coal industry.
Join the Diane Rehm Show this morning from 10 to noon after Charlotte Talks on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
As we look back in grassroots effort, we had a lot of battles over water meters. We had a lot of battles over reval of 2011. Those two items pale in comparison to what is going on in the fervor in Lake Norman.
That's John Hetwer, who is the former president of the Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce and kind of a leader of the business opposition to this, speaking at last Monday night's Charlotte City Council meeting. We're talking about opposition to widening I-77, not widening I-77, but using toll lanes on I-77 in the Huntersville-Cornelius-Davidson area with Kurt Noss, founder of Widen I-77, and Jim Puckett, Republican District 1 Commissioner on Mecklenburg County's Commission. Tom Bullock and David Borax are here from WFAE News. He mentioned that the opposition or the ruckus going on over this is remarkable, and you have said, Jim Puckett, that you've never seen an issue that has more universal support than the disdain for this project. Is that regionally located, just up in your area, or is it countywide?
Well, it started there, but it is growing as people are starting to watch this. And it really kind of started as a distrust and a frustration, and then it led to anger. And there is now really a hatred towards Charlotte and governance in this region. And I've been, I was part of the whole busing federal lawsuit over busing. I've been involved with an awful lot of controversial things. I have never seen an issue that had this much unanimity around it, that every single demographic says this is the wrong thing to do.
What is the kernel of it? What is the thing that people hate the most?
I don't think you can put a point on that. I really think that it is so diverse. It's actually something that I heard at the city council when I was covering it on Monday, which is simple. Some people don't like the contract. Some people don't like tolls. Some people don't like the fact that these tolls are uncapped. They're called dynamic, which is a fancy way of saying that basically, depending on whether or not it's rush hour, you could pay anywhere from a quarter to $20 each way. Nobody knows quite yet.
And they won't tell you because we've had them on this program, and they will not anscer that question. What is it going to cost?
It's not $20 each way, but
I'm just using.
Well,
their consultant study said that it would be peak hour would be $20 round trip if you went Charlotte to Huntersville.
I was just pulling hypotheticals, but it's a fair thing. I don't think there is a unifying force against, and I will also say this. I would agree with Jim's assessment when it comes to North Mecklenburg County. In Charlotte, though, I would say that most Charlotteans, there isn't that hotbed of universal hatred because, frankly, they don't have to deal with it the same way people of North Meck do.
Interesting point, though, because what we learned in the Charlotte City Council meeting is that I-77 South through the heart of Charlotte is also going to be widened with private toll lanes. Very much in a similar manner as what we're dealing with up in Lake Norman. And the news reports are saying that it would most likely be Sintra who would be managing those toll lanes as well.
And you're already seeing people in South Charlotte mobilize.
Well, we're talking about, but this is right through, this is a major artery right through the center of Charlotte. So we're talking about going past Woodlawn and Tyvola and all the way down to the South Carolina border. I found it interesting in the Charlotte City Council meeting Monday, they said, well, we think this is a bad contract. They were unanimous in that assessment. But then they affirmed a managed lane strategy. And as part of that managed lane strategy is the exact same type of project for their own city.
Well, Mike, back to the question you asked a minute ago about what's the kernel of this. I would add one other thing to Tom's list, and that is that All of those issues that John Hetwer mentioned a minute ago that we just heard, the problems with the water meters and that sort of thing. There was another movement against the Red Line commuter rail project. There were people who did not like that for the Lake Norman area. All of those are in a kind of an undercurrent of distrust between the Lake Norman area and Charlotte. And I think that's another major thing. So I guess one of the questions is, does that same situation exist in other parts of Charlotte that would drive a movement on the scale of this one?
And I think that's what's growing. That's what I personally am hearing within the last week. This has clearly been at the doorstep of North Mecklenburg. But when you look at the way this debate has been handled, that's where the frustration and the anger and the distrust is starting to grow. When you look at the fact that NCDOT was given an hour to talk to the Charlotte City Council just before their vote.
Over dinner,
no opposition. The Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce, for example, wasn't asked, could you please tell us what your opposition is? And then you have a list of speakers, 45 speakers, and we're told you sign up, you speak in order. The executive director of the Charlotte Chamber was number 40. He magically got moved to the bottom, and at that time he was the last speaker. By the time it all came through, he magically became the last speaker at number 45.
And they're in favor.
And they're absolutely in favor because this works. Because the truth of the matter is, if you're coming to a Charlotte Panther game, for example, and you're coming south on I-77, and there's a ton of congestion, this toll lane allows you to bypass all of those people that are having to use it for local traffic. Mm-hmm. So it becomes a bypass to all the congestion for people that are trying to get their kids to school.
And what's wrong with that?
What's wrong with that is it does not add any capacity to the people who live in an area whose population has grown 533% with absolutely no additional infrastructure in 30 years.
You're a politician. You're on the county commission. Why would the city council handle it that way?
Well, my guess is that when you go and look at campaign finance, you will notice an awful lot of checks that came there. You talked about Charles Jeter. Charles Jeter, on the day that the Lake Norman Chamber went to Raleigh, chartered a bus, went to Raleigh to talk to legislatures, he got a donation of $2,400 from Ned Curran, who's the Secretary of the Transportation. There are private
He's
people
the chairman
funding,
of the NCDOT board.
NCDOT board. Excuse me. He's also the current chairman of the Charlotte Chamber. Ned's a friend of mine, but when you have the chairman of the transportation giving private donations to campaign people, I think you start to see why that has an influence.
Kurt Noss, you have done something most people have not done. You've actually read the contract, the Cintra contract with the state.
Well, it's over 900 pages, so it's a bit of an urban myth that I've read every word, but I have read the salient parts.
So from that reading of the salient parts, what do you walk away with? What troubles you the most?
This is only an hour-long program. So, if you look at, there are so many things in the contract. For instance, it allows Cintra to take advantage of federal tax loopholes. If we compensate Cintra, not only do we compensate them, but we also pay their taxes if it results in any tax liability. We bail out Cintra if they default. We bail them out 80 cents on the dollar. It makes it almost impossible for us to widen I-77 with general purpose lanes at any time in the future because there's a non-compete agreement. NCDOT wrote specifically a contract in a project back into the non-compete, a key project that was going to be out of it, and they didn't bother to tell anybody. It even grants the airspace, restricts the airspace over the highway.
And why does that matter? Why does that matter?
Well, if you want to build a bridge, you have to get Cintra's permission. And as it turns out, we did a FOIA request on some emails, and that non-compete was changed because Cintra threatened to increase the price of the project $60 million if we did not.
This road is an interstate highway. How can the state give away air rights and other things to a project that really belongs to the country?
Because federal law allows the state to manage the way that those dollars are spent.
It was built by the feds. It's not owned by the feds.
All right. So you mentioned the process that speakers lined up to speak at this, and the fact that there was a dinner prior to the city council meeting on Monday night in which NCDOT got to speak. There were questions raised during that dinner. Monday night, Nick Tennyson, North Carolina Secretary of Transportation, mentioned that the contract could use some revisions, and that prompted a question from Councilman John Autry, First, we hear from Tennyson.
I don't think anybody is saying that we have got a contract that necessarily doesn't need additional work. We certainly have the possibility of continuing to work with our partners at I-77 Mobility Partners, and I would anticipate we'd do that.
What leverage does the state of North Carolina have to compel Centra to come back to the table?
I think that we are in a business deal, and the same as any business deal, we have the relationship, we have the ability to negotiate, and we have a partner who is not also that is interested, a partner who is interested in a successful project that will candidly lead to other projects. So it's not a case where this is any different than any business with whom you're doing business. You enter negotiations to try to make sure you have the best outcome for the long-term future.
The question that Councilman John Autry just asked sounded a little bit to me like a due diligence question. Isn't it a little late for the City Council to be doing due diligence?
Well, there's a key, and I was at both the dinner meeting and the vote, and what was interesting is, first of all, note who is representing the North Carolina Department of Transportation. If you have any doubt of how important this project is to overall state plans, if you have any doubt about how important the Charlotte City Council vote was on this, even though it doesn't come really that far into Charlotte, it's the fact that the state secretary of transportation was there to make a case. And the case really boiled down to, hey, for the first time at least that I've heard, we understand that this contract, it's not great. There are some things that we could tweak. But, Autry follows up to say, well, what makes you think that you can actually get them back to the table? It's more than a due diligence question. It's a nod to the fact that construction has already begun. And it's a nod to the fact that, as we heard later on, that the NCDOT, even if Charlotte had voted against it, even if the Regional Transportation Board votes against it, that the NCDOT is of the opinion that this contract, they already have enough okays to just build it anyway.
This thing sounds like what the military people would call a FUBAR. Why?
That's an excellent question. And those of us who've been looking at this, really, you have to, there is no logic to this.
I mean, if it's truly not in the state's best interest, with all these things that you just mentioned, the caveats in this contract, and it's truly not in the local area's best interest because this is a local access road for which there are no alternatives, and this will cause more congestion, according to you. If all this is true, why would anybody agree to this?
And by the way, not just according to me.
What's in it?
It will cause more congestion by the admission of NCDOT.
Well, who's benefiting from this?
Well, that is the $655 million question that we can't seem to find the answer to. You have a governor who it seems to have a political death wish because 7% of his electoral margin of victory last election came from North Mecklenburg and South Iredale, and he has just alienated a key constituency. I imagine there will be an investigation at some point, and that will come out. There are some connections. There's a central lobbyist who also happens to be McCrory's campaign manager, so we see some tight connections there. But until we actually, people say follow the money, until we actually are able to do that, I don't think we're going to have the answer to your question.
Well, there's already been political fallout. This has become a political issue.
And there'll be more.
The mayor of Huntersville and
actually,
two council persons.
Almost the entire board was flipped
because of this. We have a Democratic or Republican challenger to Pat McCrory in the primary, whose whole reason for running is this. You have
a Republican challenger to Charles Jeter because Mr. Jeter saw the light on Wednesday after the November election that overturned Huntersville. He became a convert very quickly. And so it clearly is politics because that's the only way apparently people can speak.
Explain to me why the Charlotte City Council has such weight in this decision.
This has to do with the way that the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization is set up. CRTPO.
That's not a character from Star Wars.
No, it isn't.
Okay.
But this is a regional organization that consists of leaders from all the towns and counties in our area. Actually, the county doesn't have a representative on it.
We do.
They
actually get 2 votes.
They get 2. Anyway, the votes are weighted according to population. So the city of Charlotte actually gets about 47% of the weighted vote, which means that in most cases, it's impossible for any opposition to overturn a decision.
All they need is one or two towns to agree with them, and whatever they want passes. And also, David, that vote is carried not by 46 delegates, but by one delegate.
Right.
You know, when in a typical representative body, when you do it by weighted by population, you send more delegates. In this case, you have one delegate's vote counts 46 times as much as most of the small towns.
The opposition to this, your group and others, keep getting slapped down. You keep being told it's too late, there's nothing that can be done. We are being told that to cancel this contract at this stage would cost anywhere from $82 to $300 million. Now, that's a wide range to me.
It's wider than that. The North Carolina auditor, when Senator Jeff Tart asked their opinion, said 18 to 300 million and thought it would be 30.
Yeah, we could talk to that.
Yes.
Why don't they know the figure? Surely it is. There must be a contract clause
because
that
it's
says
negotiated.
We could talk to that $300 million. Yeah. Basically, there's kind of two opt-out clauses. Either we pay the greater of the outstanding debt or the fair market value of the project. And the lower number, the $80 million, was the outstanding debt. Centra maintains they spent $50 million on the project so far, and that's the bulk of that. And then there's the $300 million, which is, they say, the fair market value. What the consultant did, who was hired by the auditor to do this, is they took Centra's revenue projections and they discounted them back to present-day dollars. And that's how they came up with the $300 million. And we would say, well, that's not an independent audit. That's Centra's position. That's exactly what Centra would do if they wanted to calculate a cancellation penalty.
I think the point here is that the amount that it would cost the state is going to be subject to negotiation at best and litigation at worst.
And that money would come from where?
Well, that's one of the key things with the council's vote, and that's one of the things that is still up for debate. The NCDOT and Governor McCrory have said time and again that if this project is canceled, that cancellation fee should be paid for by the cities.
Okay, but one of the things that we never talk about when we talk about cancellation penalties is we need to talk about cancellation benefits. And the fact is that if we cancel this, there's a $94 million taxpayer contribution that goes back to the state's coffers. There's $77 million taxpayer dollars being spent for private toll access ramps, goes back to the state coffers. There's $75 million in toll subsidies, go back to the state coffers.
So it's a wash.
So there's
and to be fair,
it may not even be it may be better than a wash too. Yeah. To be
Correct.
fair, and this is something that actually I was going to get to. It's also not clear if the NCDOT and the governor have the ability to make the municipalities pay this cancellation fee. In fact, something that you heard, and again from lawmakers who were against the project, is that it would take an act of the General Assembly to make that so.
And yet you wrote a letter to the City Council, Jim Puckett, in which you laid out chapter and verse statutes that make cancellation appear to be an option.
It's absolutely an option. And we might say the county commission, Mecklenburg County Commission, also had the same request from the governor. We have a delegate vote to CRTPO. So the Mecklenburg County Commission did exactly what the Charlotte City Council did. In an 8-1 vote, the Mecklenburg County Commission said, cancel this. As a matter of fact, the Mecklenburg County Commission said that if the governor is going to say that it's all or nothing, in an 8-1 vote said, then blow all of it up and start over again. Everything within the region. They are that adamant that this is a bad idea.
All managed lanes.
All managed lanes. And the governor is basically threatening that we will have to just put a hold on every road project in the region. And the Mecklenburg County Commission said, then if that's the only option, this is so bad, you need to do that.
Wow. Jim Puckett, District 1 County Commissioner in Mecklenburg, along with Kurt Noss, founder of Widen I-77. Tom Bullock and David Borax are with us from WFAE News. We'll continue our conversation and share with you lots of comments that are coming in from people listening to this program as we speak. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Charlotte School of Law, offering a full-time online corporate compliance certificate program for both lawyers and non-lawyers, accepting RSVPs for a lunch and learn session January 27th. Info at 704-808-8030. And by Culture and Heritage Museums, hosting a concert by the Jerry Douglas Band with an American resonator guitar and lap steel player and record producer tomorrow at the McKelvey Center. Tickets at chmuseums.org/Southern Sound Series. The second biggest coal producer in the U.S. just filed for bankruptcy. It's the latest sign of a declining industry, one that's facing plummeting energy prices and new environmental regulations. They'll take a look at all of that in 20 minutes at 10 o'clock on the Diane Rehm Show. If you'd like to join our conversation, jump in. Charlotte Talks at WFAE.org or search for WFAE on Facebook or Twitter. We are coming right back.
I'm Shankar Vedantam, science reporter for NPR. I've seen firsthand how old cars can be turned into your favorite programs. I've actually donated 2 of my old cars to public radio. Trust me, no matter how old or duct-taped your car is, we can turn it into Morning Edition, All Things Considered, hey, even one of my science reports. Turn your car into the programs you love. I did. Here's how.
Look for the WFAE vehicle donation link under the support tab at WFAE.org for all the details.
I'm a contracts lawyer. I review contracts like the one that has been so discussed for a living every single day. And the reality is that although a contract is at the center of this entire controversy, this is about more than words on a page and signatures on a dotted line. It's about the impact that it will make in our community for the next half century.
That's Chaz Beasley, who is a Democrat who will run against the winner of the Republican primary for Charles Jeter's seat in November, speaking at last Monday night's Charlotte City Council meeting in which they took up this topic of toll lanes. But perhaps one of the most effective speakers who brought up one of the key points in all of this, which we really haven't discussed that much, was a young woman named Julia Carr. She is 15 years old.
I really, really love Cornelius. I love the weather, I love Lake Norman, and I love the community here. Growing up, I've always imagined that after college, I would come back and start a family in this beautiful little town. But if these tolls get passed, I think my childhood imaginations are going to have to find a new zip code. I'm sure that there's dozens of other people in this room that could better argue the logistics of these tolls, so I'm not going to. But I have one thing they don't: time. No offense to anyone in this room, and not to set up anyone's midlife crisis here, but by the time this 50-year contract ends, you all will be dead.
We're all laughing, but that's really true.
This may kill me before she got back to school that night.
Mike, let me just say something about the length of this contract, and that is that a contract like this, which is so expensive, imagine buying a house and paying way more than the typical value for a house. It's got to be, the payments have to be spread out over a long period of time. So in the industry, contracts like this are typically 50, I've seen 80-year contracts, and they are a long time. That doesn't really go to the heart of the argument against it here. But
the reason they're that long is because Cintra is putting the upfront money in to build these lanes, which the state claims they don't have, so they have to recoup their investment.
But what's interesting about that is it has to be done through Europe. The U.S. banking system does not allow 50-year financing for these projects. So the funding is.
Yeah, I don't know if that's.
Well, what's actually more interesting is that they probably won't even own the road for that full period of time.
Well,
there's not a private toll lane in the U.S. that is under operation, has been in operation for 15 years under its original owner. And it's interesting that 15-year time frame because what happens
under the terms of the contract, can they sell their ownership?
Absolutely. They could sell it. So what they do, like in this case, Cintra is not going to make any debt payments until 2035. They defer all the principal. They defer 90% of the interest until 2035. So they make money on the tolls. When they get a big balloon payment comes due, they'll sell it to somebody else, and they'll refinance in it, and we'll lather, rinse, and repeat.
The tolls for the Holland Tunnel, for the George Washington Bridge in New York City, for the New Jersey Turnpike, for the Bay Bridge in Maryland, are they all state-operated toll facilities, or are they run by, created by, built by, maintained by private companies?
What you just laid out were older projects, older toll projects, and that's what we're seeing here, this private-public partnership, the P3s, is a relatively new creation when it comes to transportation projects. We don't have the federal money the way that we used to be able to build a Holland Tunnel. But way, way back in the day...
And why don't we?
For reasons that we've actually heard from David earlier. A lot of it has to do with the gas tax. Frankly, the federal government just passed the first long-term transportation infrastructure budget and by long-term I mean it will last for 2 years. It was the first one that they had passed in, I believe, 5 years. Before that, they just kept doing, little patchwork things. That's a whole other show about the dysfunction of Congress, and frankly, it would be riveting.
Well, isn't it also a discussion about taxes? We have this mindset in America today that we have to cut taxes. We can't raise taxes. Taxes have to be low. Well, as the former county manager, Harry Jones, told me many times on this program, taxes equate to services. No taxes, no services.
Here's the irony of this particular project, just bringing it back to I-77 again, and that is that this project, if it were built with general purpose lanes, free lanes, would actually cost the taxpayer less than what we're putting in to build private toll lanes. Remember, we threw out a number of $250 million in taxpayer contribution by the time all the subsidies and
well, Kurt, explain. That's a point that you've been making for the past few years. Can you explain a little bit more? We're not talking about the same project. We're talking about a scaled-back project.
Sure. Well, the I-77 private toll lane project has most of the expense in construction building toll-related bridges and lanes going into Charlotte, which is not where the congestion is. If you're going to spend the money where you need to, you build general-purpose lanes through the Lake Norman area. That's a fairly modest project. I mean, we're talking about adding lanes within an existing right-of-way, and estimates a 2009 Parsons-Brinkerhoff study put the cost at around $75 million. You inflate that and you say we're somewhere between $100 and $150 million, which is a substantial percentage less than the $250 million that we're contributing to this private project.
Let me share with you some comments that have come in as we've been talking. Kate on Facebook, there are other P3, public-private partnership managed lanes projects across the country. Which ones have better contracts than the one NCDOT has for I-77?
I can't speak to it. Again, one of the things that we miss in this, and it's because most people are not familiar with North Mecklenburg, the design of this, regardless of the funding, the design of this to make it profitable does not work to serve the people. Well, that's an interesting thing also. I was told when I sat in the mayor's office with Mayor Roberts and the Charlotte Department of Transportation, CDOT said they designed it. Now, they have since said, the North Carolina Department of Transportation says, oh, no, we did. But CDOT took it, and I said that makes perfectly good sense because this absolutely works for downtown Charlotte. It is a road that bypasses congestion, leaves all the people who are congested, and gives you a way to get to downtown Charlotte. So if I was CDOT, this is exactly the way I would have designed it if my only interests were serving downtown Charlotte.
Lester on Facebook, I live in Atlanta, and we have Peach Pass. Peach Pass and NC Quick Pass are related. The truth is that very few people use the Peach Pass lanes, and the same traffic backups exist. The pass rates fluctuate, and nobody wants to pay to use the federal highway system because we have already paid for it. What about that?
Well, interesting with the Peach Pass, what happened is when they turned that into a hot lane, because it used to be a carpool lane, they raised the occupancy rate, just like what we're doing here. They raised it from 2 to 3. And what happens when you do that is you kick out 80% of the people who would be carpooling because only about 1 out of every 5 cars has more than 3 or more occupants. And so what they found is your emailer is correct. The congestion actually increased because you kicked out 80% of carpoolers and put them all now onto the general purpose lanes.
Jay writes, I moved to this region after living in several urban areas across the country. I can say from experience that all cities build general purpose lanes, and within time they all fill up. What will we do when these proposed alternative GP lanes fill up within a decade? And I see this as more of an opportunity for some politicians to keep their name in headlines than concern for the future.
Well, and that's actually what CDOT and NCDOT's argument was at the dinner meeting overall, that the idea is that general purpose lanes will go through this period where they're wide open for quite some time, but as development spurs along those routes, that eventually the congestion will come. A great example of that is I-45 right now, the loop that just finished. Right. So what they argue is you have to create this kind of onerous price, which would be either tolls or the congestion. And again, this is their argument, in order to come up with a system that that basically encourages or in some cases forces people to get off of the road and into buses and into situations where it's public transportation. And that's another use for these toll lanes is supposedly basically a version of mass transit based on buses.
That's like saying we should never take a bath because we'll just get dirty again.
But it's worse than that, because here's the other problem with this is that we're talking about providing minimum amount of infrastructure for people. So I get it. If you're saying the future is to manage this, well, then let's at least provide the minimum standard and then talk about managing the future. But when you have people that the population has grown 533% and has had nothing, you can't manage. We're now talking about retroactively managing the past. So if we widen this and say from this point forward, we're going to have to use toll lanes to start to manage growth, that's a different thing. We're not talking about managing growth. We're talking about just getting people up to what they should have right now.
Colin on Facebook, having moved up from Florida where it is not uncommon for a driver to run into toll lanes, they do not relieve any congestion. In fact, they are bottlenecks of driving hell. His words, not mine. Allison on Twitter, I don't see how tolls will help, since there are many cars from Ohio, West Virginia, and Virginia that travel on it, and they and semis can't use it. Also, please remember that this road is not just congested at rush hour. This road is congested at 2 p.m.
Mike, let me just
2 p.m. on a Saturday
thing.
afternoon.
Yeah, correct one thing about that. Commuters coming or travelers coming through the area from out of state can certainly use those toll lanes. It's all going to be linked into the national toll payment system, Easy Pass or whatever it is. Trucks, that was an issue that was raised at the Toll Lane Summit in November in Cornelius, and it was something that the Department of Transportation said, well, maybe we should take a look at this, and if there are any revisions in the contract, I would expect that would be one of the first ones would be to allow trucks in those lanes.
And we would have serious issues with that, because right now the toll lane thicknesses they're only half the thickness of a regular general purpose lane because they're designed not to take heavy commercial vehicles.
They would have to increase the cost of the project.
Well, it's not just that. You change the whole scope. You change the revenue projection and you change the cost of the project. And we would argue, and we would be making a call to our lawyer, that is a material change in the contract, which therefore under state law requires it to be rebid.
But I want to bring this back to what I have to remind people all the time because they don't live there, is this is an experiment. NCDOT engineers themselves and the City Transportation Committee said this is the first of its kind in North Carolina. This is an experiment on how we deal with this. But it's a 50-year experiment contractual. If the state of North Carolina were managing this experiment and 5 or 10 years down the road we go, this didn't really work, we could change it. Yeah. But that's not the case. And the example I use that I think is a good one. A few years ago, we thought the best idea to handle traffic on Independence Boulevard, 74, was to widen it and put in bus lanes down the middle. And we have found that did not work. So we are now talking about changing those bus lanes into toll lanes. Had we done a P3 project like this with those bus lanes, we would be buying out 45 years of a contract to say it seemed like a good idea, but it didn't work. That's where we are.
Thad emails, one of the speakers just said the public wants free-flowing traffic and no tolls. Not quite right. I live in South Charlotte, and I want this, not to pay taxes for someone else's problem. Who pays is not just the crux of the matter, it is the only matter.
As a guy who does taxes for his second job, Mecklenburg County Commission, I have to remind the people in South Charlotte that 485 was built and widened before 485 was completed in North Mecklenburg. So the people in North Mecklenburg
was completed.
But no, 485.
Oh, no, yeah, I'm sorry.
485. So the people in North Mecklenburg have been paying to build and widen 485 before they even got 485. So we all pay all the taxes.
David emails, the individuals opposed to the toll lanes are being disingenuous. They and this is garbled on my screen, so I'll have to make this up here. They have in representatives... I really can't read this. Representatives which say government doesn't work, and who cuts taxes to prove that point? The people who say government doesn't work. They also won't raise taxes to adequately fund crumbling road and infrastructure or to build new capacity in the roads or build transit. Then when the representatives do their constituents' bidding to privatize public services, they scream that it's not fair. These opponents want someone else to fund their road and don't want to build adequate infrastructure for everyone.
Yeah, again, completely wrong. What we've said is we want a modest general purpose lane project that will cost the taxpayer less than what we're contributing right now to private toll lanes.
But I was kind of getting at that, Mr. Republican over here.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of getting that earlier in this conversation because Republicans constantly say they need to cut taxes. We want lower taxes, and people don't want to pay higher taxes.
Right.
That's true.
Well,
but
actually,
with taxes come services and infrastructure. Without it, you don't get that.
Well, and one of the things you have to do is you have to start to prioritize your spending. So that's the first thing. I actually am one of those. I thought Mark Washburn had this right. I think that we have a unique window in time where people are used to spending $3.50 for gas. It's now tumbled. So there's an opportunity from a market perspective to say, hey, why don't we take advantage of that? Add some gas taxes. I disagree with dropping the gas tax at this time and spreading it out. Because here's the other problem. Everybody in this county is sending money to Raleigh to build roads. We are the only county that has said we'll build tolls. I-85 is being widened in Gaston County, free. I-85 in Cabarrus County was widened, free. I-40 is $800 million going to Asheville to widen I-40 in Asheboro, free. We are the only people that have said, you know what, there's not enough money, so we're going to pay our gas taxes, build roads all across North Carolina, and pay to build our own roads here. That's not fair.
The opposition suffered a setback very recently when the North Carolina Superior Court Judge Osmond Smith ruled against your lawsuit to stop the project and left very little wiggle room for doubt there. So what happens next? Where do you go next with this?
Yeah, well, and what the judge said basically was this belongs in the political arena.
He said to go to the legislature and to the governor's office,
right, which is
NCDOT.
Which is basically what we'll do. I mean, one of the things that we need to do now is we need to fix CRTPO. It is an improperly functioning regional governing body. It is basically a de facto Charlotte dictatorship. And we'll need to work to make that happen, and we'll probably bring that up for another vote where we don't need Charlotte support. I mean, we're faced right now with the prospect of 11 people in Charlotte just decided on 50 years of tolls through Lake Norman. 11 people who neither live in the area nor represent us decided the major artery through the region for the rest of our lifetime.
Kurt Nass is founder of Widen I-77, which is probably the leading and perhaps the oldest group in opposition to these tolls. Jim Puckett is Mecklenburg County Commissioner representing District 1, which is the Lake Norman area. Tom Bullock and Dave Borax, reporters for WFAE News, who have been reporting on this for years. Thank you all for the hour. We haven't heard the end of this.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Charlotte Talks